Hi there everyone, welcome to World Insight on CGTN. I'm Dongshi in for Tian Wei today. Coming up on our program today. South Korean President Moon has flown to Washington to meet President Trump. Can these ideologically different leaders reach a compromise on their common DPRK problem? My colleague Tian Wei attended the Summer Davos Forum that gathered business and political leaders. These leaders want to see how the economy, technology, and environmental protection can converge into a virtuous cycle of economic growth. 50 days after becoming South Korean president, Mr. Moon Jae-in is on the way to strengthen his country's most important alliance. South Korean ties with the U.S. are facing multiple challenges. Yet to deal with the thorny issue of the DPRK nuclear threats, the South Korean government has no choice but to stick together with the U.S.
It is hardly surprising that the new South Korean president makes the U.S. the destination of his first overseas visit.
I am confident that the future of the ROK alliance will make a greater leap forward as a more comprehensive alliance covering all sectors, including political, economic, social, and cultural fields.
DPRK is on top of the agenda, yet the two leaders have different views on the future of the country. Trump's opinion on the DPRK government becomes undoubtedly clear after the death of American Otto Warmbier, who was detained and then sent back to the U.S. in a coma.
It's a brutal regime, and we'll be able to handle it.
However, President Moon's stance is not exactly the same.
The new Korean government has exerted all its effort to resolving the DPRK nuclear issue. Based on the firm ROK-US alliance, you'll be able to invest in Korea with no concerns. And furthermore, you can also gain an opportunity to invest in the DPRK at some point in the future.
So far, though neither Washington nor Seoul have managed to put the brakes on Pyongyang's missile program, Moon's decision to suspend the deployment of the controversy THAAD anti-missile system has already annoyed Washington. Putting the DPRK aside, trade is another issue between the two. According to the White House, Trump would raise concerns about barriers to U.S. auto sales and the enormous amount of steel that sometimes ends up being surplus Chinese steel that comes to the U.S. via South Korea.
What can we expect from President Moon Jae-in's visit to Washington? Let's put that question to our panel of guests here. With us in our Beijing studio, we have Yang Xiyu, who's a senior research fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. Also in Beijing, Balbina Huan, a visiting professor at Georgetown University. She also served as senior special advisor to the U.S. State Department. And joining us in Medford, Massachusetts, it's Son Yoon Lee, who's at Kim Koo Korea Foundation, professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Welcome to the program. Let me begin with our guests here in our Beijing studio. It's not difficult to imagine the kind of topics that are on the table, topping the agenda for both presidents, the threats, the security threats from the DPRK. But the fact is, the United States and South Korea want the same thing here, for the DPRK to denuclearize and to give up its nuclear and missile program. Where they differ is how they want to do it. The United States has insisted on preconditions, where South Korea, or at least President Moon Jae-in, has advocated a softer approach. He has expressed his willingness to engage Pyongyang when the time is right. Let me start with you, Mr. Yang. When the two presidents meet this time, how do they find that common ground? Where is the middle ground for the two presidents, and who will budge?
Well, common ground, denuclearization of the North Korea, that is the common goal and a common base for both of the capital's policies. But same goal, different approaches. Say denuclearization, but how to denuclearize North Korea, different approaches. You mentioned preconditional dialogue. Dialogues is the same between Washington D.C. and Pyongyang. Same goal, same approach. Same dialogue is the must. But preconditional dialogues or some non-preconditional dialogues. So that is the different approaches. In other words, Washington wants to increase pressures on North Korea, maximum pressures, But it seems to me, new government, the new president in Seoul want to decrease pressures on North Korea so that the dialogues can be started.
Professor Hwan, what is your take on President Moon's strategy so far? What are the chances that he will take a softer approach?
Well, in fact, actually, the differences between the two right now are not that stark. Indeed, the Trump administration announced their North Korea review, and Professor Young is correct. United States, Washington wants a stronger approach. But remember, Moon Jae-in has also said he wants to maximize pressure. At the same time, he wants to offer incentives. So, in fact, I don't think there's that much difference with with the preconditions. Even President Trump said he's willing to meet with Kim Jong-un or even talk to North Korea.
Do you see that as President Moon playing down the differences just before this trip to Washington, D.C.?
I don't think so, because I think President Trump has said so, and some of his statements have seemed contradictory. But frankly, so do Moon Jae-in's, in the sense that he wants to offer more engagement, but also maximum pressure. The key is actually not really what South Korea and Washington do, but actually how North Korea responds. You can only engage if the other is willing to accept it. And for the last 8 years, Kim Jong-un has said no to President Obama.
Before we move on to my next question, I want to put on those graphics for you. The so-called return of sunshine policy. Mr. Moon's conservative predecessor, Park Geun-hye, who was impeached in that bribery scandal, took a hard line toward the DPRK, similar to Mr. Trump. But despite Moon's softer stance, Pyongyang's quick succession of missile tests stoked American fears that the U.S. mainland could soon be within range. What is the better and long-term strategy here? Let me give that question to Professor Lee. Will the so-called sunshine policy work in the long term?
To be fair, the jury is still out on the efficacy of the so-called sunshine policy pursued by South Korea from the late 1990s to the late 2000s. In a nutshell, it was a policy of engagement, generous aid, unconditional aid, with a view towards seeking gradual opening and reform in North Korea. In reality, North Korea has accelerated its nuclear and missile weapons program with such generous aid, billions of dollars over the past decade or so. So a return to sunshine policy would favor North Korea, and I think the U.S. would be strongly opposed to that. For now, I think the two leaders will, of course, resort to diplomatic niceties. A summit meeting is a highly scripted, choreographed affair, unlike a blind date, and I guess that's a good thing. But there is the element of the unknown, spontaneity, unpredictability coming out of President Trump. President Trump may, during his many conversations with President Moon, push the South Korean leader on the thorny issue of THAAD, for example, and basically question him, whose side are you on? Obama did that with President Park 2 years ago. So I wouldn't be surprised if Trump does push President Moon a bit and try to corner him and get some answers out of him.
We will get to the topic of THAAD later in our program, but for now I want to stay on the topic of Moon's strategy. Professor Hwan, do you think the so-called sunshine policy will be long-term here, or is it a temporary policy at the start of Moon's administration?
Well, the sunshine policy's entire logic was always long-term. In fact, President Kim Dae-jung never tried to hide the fact that it was a long-term strategy of gradual transformation. And in fact, remember that Kim Dae-jung started this, implemented it, actually before North Korea's, the second nuclear crisis really began to occur and North Korea began to accelerate nuclear weapons. So to be fair, President Kim really started sunshine even before the nuclear weapons program really came to light.
Mr. Young, your take on the effectiveness of the policy?
No, I don't think returning of the sunshine policy is possible, simply because the failure of the last 2 decades policies from Seoul. Let me put it by this way. We have 4 presidents of the South Korea. First 2 were labeled as progressive president, Kim Dae-jung and Moon Jae-in. And they conducted North Korean policy characterized by de-linkage between nuclear issue and the inter-Korean relations. Let me say, any president of the ROK has to meet how to deal with North Korean nuclear issue, how to deal with the inter-Korean relationship. The pair of the challenges, how to deal with the relation of the pair of the challenges. And Kim Dae-jung and Moon Jae-in conducted a de-linking policy, say, separate dealing with nuclear issue and the inter-Korean relationship. And they were successful in improving interrelation with North Korea, but failed to deal with nuclear issue. And then moved to the conservative President Lee Myung-bak. They conducted a linkage between the two. And so did President Park. Say, de-linking failed, and linkage also failed. So now another progressive president came into the office, say President Moon. I think he has to open a third path between the de-linkage and the linkage policy. And by his wording, he said, parallel of push forward by dialogues, improving relation with engagement with North Korea, and also push forward the nuclear denuclearization process. But theoretically, it's possible. In reality, it's quite difficult. You want to talk with North Korea, both nuclear issue and inter-Korean relationship. But North Korea will definitely reject the subject of the nuclear issue. If you talk inter-Korean relationship, fine, okay, great. If you talk nuclear issue, no way. So how to implement the Bingjin policy, say both nuclear issue and the inter-Korean relation with North Korea? It's a really tough mission facing Moon Jae-in, the president.
For any consensus to be reached this time, for any middle ground to be found this time, there has to be a more coordinated policy between the two sides when it comes to the DPRK. What would that adjustment look like for both presidents this time, Professor Klein?
Well, again, I think it's not so much the coordination between the two. Of course, that you are absolutely correct, it's critical, but it's not nearly as far apart or different as a lot of people are making it out to be. I think Professor Yang's analysis is exactly right, and it was an excellent way of portraying this. What's interesting is President Trump seems to want to separate the nuclear issue separately from the other issues because he has made a priority. Top U.S. national security threat is missiles and nuclear weapons. And so interestingly, there is a lot more similarity between President Moon and President Trump. The final point is, again, it comes down to, it's not so much what everybody else pressures in their approach to North Korea, it's what North Korea is willing to accept. And Professor Yang is right, North Korea is saying no way. Nuclear weapons is just simply not on the table.
Professor Lee, what will it take for the United States to sit down to engage Pyongyang?
Well, we can look to the past for some clues. The Bush administration, our viewers might recall, was very strong on rhetoric, quite hostile toward Kim Jong-il. And then North Korea escalated with its first nuclear test in October 2006. That compelled the ideologically rigid Bush administration to really concede, make all kinds of concessions, give North Korea what it wanted, a return to nuclear talks, food aid, taking North Korea off the list of state-sponsored terrorism, also delisting North Korea and allowing North Korea to collect its laundered money, $25 million held at a small bank in Macau. So it will take another major crisis, perhaps another nuclear test or a successful long-range missile test for North Korea to send a message to the Trump administration: the situation is about to get out of hand, you better come back and meet with us on disarmament talks. And that is a sure way for the US to really be reconciled to accepting North Korea as a de facto nuclear state.
Trump's National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, has said the United States will use all options if it has to. Mr. Young, what does it mean, all options?
Well, theoretically...
Are we talking about more economic sanctions, military threats?
Well, theoretically, all options including, military, war. But in practice, war is a really extremely difficult option to take. So basically, I think all options now in practice means, except war, every measure could be available, including the totally contain or isolate North Korea, the banking and financial sector. That would be very vital for the sustainable economy of North Korea. So I think that although we can basically believe the probability of a war is pretty low, the situation remains quite dangerous, because if all measures except war put on North Korea, that will force North Korea to do anything they can except the war. Basically, neither Pyongyang nor Washington D.C. want to war, so we will witness a very risky game, say brinkmanship by both sides to play the game. So the following situations will be very risky.
So far, the DPRK hasn't exactly reacted well or as well as desired to any of the cards the United States has played: rhetorics, enlisting help from China, and economic sanctions. What other cards does the United States still have, and what will the DPRK react better to, Professor Huang?
Well, we, meaning the United States, has all the cards that we've always had and for decades have been really unwilling to use. Again, the emphasis on all options are on the table. I think sometimes we make too much of that rhetoric. Every single U.S. president has stated that as policy, even President Obama. And in the end, as Professor Yang correctly pointed out, President Bush also had a vision. But in the end, he never used those military options. So it is correct that, and I think North Korea understands that. North Korea has simply been setting a pattern for the last 8 plus 16 years that it is moving more and more towards nothing that you try is going to make us move. Nuclear weapons is not on the table. And I think that North Korea will continue to do that until the message becomes clear.
Professor Lee, on the topic of THAAD, how do you think the temporary pause in the deployment of THAAD will figure in that meeting between President Moon and President Trump?
Well, this is a key issue at the summit meeting between the two leaders. Why? Because it really goes to the question of, for what is THAAD? Whom is THAAD intended to defend, protect? Is it South Korea primarily, or the 28,000 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea? And the message coming out of Seoul, unfortunately, has been quite ambivalent. Opposition or ambivalent stance on THAAD was a very useful gambit for Mr. Moon in the run-up to his election victory in early May. It was able to, it was a helpful gambit in placating Moon Jae-in's constituency, which tends to be far left and favors China over the U.S. as South Korea's destiny. But, however, now that he's the president, for him to be wobbly on the THAAD issue sends a very unfortunate message to the United States. Just 2 weeks ago, President Moon's special advisor in Washington said that THAAD is primarily intended to defend, to protect Americans, not South Koreans, which is an absurd proposition. So I think this issue will continue to cloud the otherwise healthy bilateral relationship between Washington and Seoul.
All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Mr. Yang, Professor Huang, Professor Lee, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
And you're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, still to come on our program. The Summer Davos Forum gathered business and political leaders to see how the economy, technology, and environmental protection can converge into a virtuous cycle of economic growth. Our Tian Wei spoke to these experts to see how close we are. Stay with us. The Summer Davos Forum this year, which just wrapped up in Dalian, has become a key convention on technology, innovation, and the environment. Topics like circular and sharing economy, oceans, green investment, and new technology innovations for environmental management were discussed in the forum. My colleague Tian Wei talked to Jim Leap, Wu Changhua, and David Gan CBE, who are engaging on environmental protection. What has the rapid development of technology brought to the environment and society? Before that, let's take a look at this.
Technology for good. According to a report, climate change stands to be one of the top underlying trends in 2017, and environmental risk ranked for the first time among the most likely and most impactful risks in the world. To address pressing global environmental risks, issues regarding climate change, environmental protection, and sustainable growth were extensively discussed amid the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos. Are the economy, technology, and environmental protection able to form a virtuous cycle aimed at accelerating growth? Let's see how humans can solve the big challenges facing innovation and environmental protection.
David Gan, Changhua Wu, James Leap, welcome to CGTN.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Talking about the innovation and the environment, I know every one of you have some great stories to help us to understand that. So why don't we, go with you, David?
Let me talk about innovation in the city, because many of us live in the city, and cities are getting very crowded and congested. And that puts a lot of strain on the city infrastructure, and that causes damage to the environment. So you and I traveling around doing our business, how are we going to do it in a smarter way? And if we can do it in a smarter way, we can take the load off the environment.
The City of London has been doing a lot of experiments about that. You are deeply involved in many of those case studies.
Well, we're now collecting data on what you and I do. So we're collecting data on the rubbish we put out. We're collecting data on the pollution, the air pollution down at the street level. We can start to understand why it's happening. We can understand how we react to it and when it's making us unhealthy. And that's really useful for us.
That's in the cities. What about in the oceans? Jim, you've been working on oceans for years now.
Well, it's true. It's more or less the opposite of the cities in a way. I mean, the city, more than half the world's people live in cities, right? Nobody lives in the ocean, yet it's 70% of the world's surface. And what's defined the way we relate to the oceans for millennia is that they are vast and largely unknown. And suddenly we realize the impact on what's happening in the oceans, and we need to know much more. And the data revolution makes that possible.
How?
Well, so for example, one of the biggest problems in the ocean is pirate fishing, in fact. I mean, it's a $20 billion a year industry, and it takes fish out of the mouths of local communities and out of the mouths of all of us. And yet it's been almost impossible to catch it. But now, with satellites, we can actually track every fishing boat in the ocean, and we can catch the ones that are fishing illegally. And that information can be put in the hands of governments that allow them to enforce their laws in a way that's never been possible
Has that
before.
been tested?
Well, Google has
What
created...
ocean? In which country?
The Pacific Ocean, a big one. Google has created something called Global Fishing Watch, actually supported by Leonardo DiCaprio. They have developed this capacity to track boats. They tracked the fishing boat all the way across the Pacific into the waters of the island nation of Kiribati. They watched that boat as it zigzagged across a marine park, sent that information to the government. The government was able to intercept the boat, capture it, and fine them $2 million.
When technologies are helping to enforce the law and technologies are helping with the business community, what about the individuals? Are their rights going to be protected? And also, whether they are going to help to shape what kind of rules to have.
I mean, like, as one individual, as one member of the species of the planet, actually, there's no way, say, you need to be free 100% of whatever, any individual can do whatever he or she wants to do. We are always constrained, right? So if you look at the human beings and the nature, so human beings, human society is pretty much constrained by nature, by the planetary, the Earth's boundary there. If you look at the cities, actually, so there are physical boundaries, even biosphere boundaries, actually. So I don't think, actually, yes, there might be cases, whatever, there's a risk, but I wouldn't be really too much worrying about that. Back to sort of the city thing, actually. It's very exciting to see London is already moving forward. China is not lagging behind either. There are more than 500 Chinese cities are literally chartering the smart cities sort of exploration already. And in it, of course, there are many cities looking to transportation system, look at health issues, air pollution issues, look at lighting, the building, whatever. What's missing today actually is really to integrate everything together. The sort of integrated structure, system change, we're not there yet. But if you look at technologies, they're already here, they're being deployed at different levels, different locations, and gradually actually, if we put them together, they could potentially play a bigger role.
But Changhua, yes, about the megacities, of course, a lot of systems are already in place. And yet, China is such a place that you have so many diversities when it comes to development stages. So when you talk about China, what kind of China? Which China are you talking about?
For less developed regions there, if you look at Guizhou, interesting enough, Guizhou for a long
southwestern part of China, mountainous area.
Yeah, for a long time, it was really the poorest region in the country if you look at a GDP number. But today, it's already leading the big data. Right, and the industry is booming literally there, and all the communication technologies are setting up their businesses there, everything like that. So there is a leapfrogging opportunities there if the leaders actually at the local level understand it really, really well.
At this critical juncture. Yeah, at this critical juncture. David.
First of all, about the integration between systems, I think there's an awful lot more of work to do there. For example, in London, we found that air pollution was getting worse because there were more people doing online shopping. And you think, what? People online shopping? But then you realize there's more and more little vans driving around the street, delivering single boxes.
And also packaging.
And blocking the roads, and then sitting there idle with lots of pollution coming out. So these things are connected. And actually, city governments and businesses don't make that connection properly at the moment. And we have to do a lot of work now to get that horizontal layer built. And if we can do that, we can solve a lot of these problems.
And how is that going to be built?
Well, I think that's a very good question. So some companies can do that. The universities play a large part in this. So my university and two other big London universities club together, and we're working on a program to integrate that layer of data with the utility and infrastructure suppliers.
I want to pick up in that context on this broader integration question, right? Because I think the potential here is to create tools that can be used by communities and governments at different development stages, and to enable action that just simply wasn't possible before, or was only possible by the very wealthy and most developed countries. Right? And so what you see, and actually there's an initiative from the forum now that is trying to build something called an Ocean Data Alliance, and it's trying to crack some of the challenges of integrating data streams from many different sources, from different kinds of satellites, from drones in the ocean, from ships, from other sources, to put that together to give you a much clearer picture of what's going on in the ocean, but also to create a business model that allows that to work for developing countries as well as for the developed countries.
When you see solutions to the challenges of the environment, it has so much to do with technology, with innovation. And there comes another opportunity, quote unquote, of gap, technological gap, the fourth industrial revolution, if we could use that term as in the forum many times. Are we going to have possibility, be able to link innovation with the saving of our environment? For now, we failed many times before, but what about now?
We have to, don't we?
We have to. Are we going to? That's two questions, right?
About this. We're going to. And we have the creative people. We haven't used the word entrepreneur yet. And
Go ahead.
I think entrepreneurs are important in all of this because they have vision, they take risks. We have young entrepreneurs who care about the environment more than some other people might do. And I can see roles for them in...
The mentality has really changed.
And I think you talk about technology. Technology is incredibly important, but also the way it's applied, the business models. So, we see the sharing economy making more with less. Maybe we can use our cities in a better way because we have smart entrepreneurs who use capacity in a better way, and that reduces pressure on the environment. So I can see all sorts of things that we can do. And I think the way in which we use data now exposes where problems are in a better way.
If I can just pick up on that, so because I think I'm a techno-optimist, at least a little bit.
I want to be with you.
There are plenty of ways things can go wrong.
You got your time to fight back.
No, I'm agreeing with it.
All right, Jim.
I mean, the history is sobering, the history of technology in some ways. But I think that we have the opportunity here to harness some amazing potential for cracking big environmental problems.
Tell me about it.
Part of this, and I think part of it is, how do we rely not just on government regulation and business, but actually ways of bringing people together around mobilizing the solutions that we need, right? So it's startups, it's universities, it's the nonprofit sector, it's different parts of the public sector, but not in the standard sort of traditional mode that we've been in, but actually together figuring out, okay, how do we actually create something that is what the world needs and that has a business model behind it?
So it's social innovation as well.
It's social
innovation. If we are
innovation
talking
as
about
well,
the technological innovation, we're also looking at social innovation.
Well, because the market naturally serves wealthy countries and profitable.
So let me give you an example of where it can go.
Changhua, you will have your opportunity to
I know.
jump in. Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, David,
No,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
With your
Quick
points.
story.
And yeah.
Where does it go horribly wrong? The hapless Thomas Midgley, he developed lead in petrol, right, in the 1930s for General Motors to make engines more efficient. What did lead in petrol do? It killed children, right? What did he then go on to invent? He created refrigeration by designing CFCs, which burn a hole in the ozone layer. He thought he was trying to do good. Yes. Everyone was buying his products. Everyone was celebrating these great innovations, and they were destroying the planet. He finally got very sick and was bedridden, and he hated being taken out of bed by the nurse, so he designed a pulley system so he could take himself out of bed. What happened? It went wrong and it hung him and he died.
This is a very important point, actually. So I think part of the debate here convened by the World Economic Forum talking about inclusive, human-centered growth, concept like that, is sort of an effort to bring everyone together to make sure we do not repeat mistakes like that. Make sure we really understand the technology, the plus, minus, pros and the cons, to avoid that, but really to play the positive part of the technologies there. I want to bring back to the innovation and the environmental issues there today, the relationship. I think compared to before, the history, today actually the world probably has never been so much sort of together and wearing the sustainability challenges. And if you look at Sustainable Development Goals under the UN banner, if you look at the Paris Agreement, the global consensus, those are the sort of setting the foundation actually for the global community to come together, recognizing the global challenges around the environmental sustainability issues. In the meantime, actually really deploying technologies, innovations,
as a way
and the fourth industrial revolution, system change and the system design becomes a very crucial element. Even the starting point. You have all the technologies, the fascinating technologies out there, potential make everything, a lot of things possible. Yeah. But somehow in order to deliver the goods part, actually innovation for the goods for sustainability, you need really the systems thinking and system design. And in it actually, I probably would like to highlight 4 key elements. One, in it actually the design, one is the digital.
I'm glad you have systematically thinking about our topic today.
One actually, the first one is the digital infrastructure, right? The digital infrastructure rides atop this, we call it super Internet of Things platform embedded in the building blocks, right? So cities actually is one example. It's sort of happening, a lot of cities doing that. Second one, I think, is really, we started to realize the biosphere. So ecosystem, environment becomes very, very important. China calls ecological civilization, UN calls sustainable development. So we know how important it is, the man-nature relationship. So biosphere matters. The third point actually is really we more and more recognize people matter. Meaning it's not just top-down, it's not just government business, rather it's everyone actually coming together, more include. The word here is inclusive actually. It's a big topic, it's a great word. We need to really drive towards that. The last one is, I think institutions matter. With all the exciting things happening, pros and cons actually, it requires new institutions, new governance, right? And even how we innovate, whatever. What kind of rules, standards we need to set, who set the rules actually. Not only just the government set the rules, regulators set the rules, rather probably everyone coming together, we need to set up the rules. So those are the 4 key elements actually in the sort of system design that's going to be really, really fundamental.
The styles of governance and the way of governance, whether in a country, or internationally speaking, really catching up at all with the speed of technology innovation?
I think, to be fair, this is new, right? And I think the world is sort of learning together. Yes, there are going to be always inadequacies, like this one element lagging behind the other one. But I think actually the vision the world shares already is there. And we pretty much know sort of roadmaps, how to take steps actually stages by stages to get there. So sometimes actually like the Trump-US situation, to a certain extent, you could say that this is a hiccup, right? It's a sort of hiccup at this particular moment because of the flaws of the international multilateralism or whatever, but I think it's okay, right? I think it's okay in a way.
It's part of the process, as you say.
It's part of the process you have to deal with anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
While you're saying that,
I'm not going to be too
was
worried.
Smiling in an interesting way. Well, David, keep on waving.
I was disagreeing with you, actually.
It's okay.
David, go ahead.
Well, I think there's something more deep-rooted happened, certainly in my country and across Europe and maybe in the US, which is that this conversation is nice for us to have, but it's bypassing half the population, right? And so we need to find a way of engaging with people that is different from the current discourse or the current way of conversing on these matters. If we don't, we're going to get this clash of opinions, and we're going to get this populist positioning that doesn't care about the environment, might only care a little bit about innovation, by the way, and holds back a lot of social progress.
But how will technological innovation help that process?
Well, it could do, and we've seen it can sit on both sides of this. I mean, you can see Mr. Trump on Twitter saying certain things, and you can see Twitter being used to counteract that. So, I think we do, and actually engaging with young people is a very, very important thing to do.
And technology certainly can play a role over there because
in some countries, like India, for example, there are huge numbers of young people who want a future, and they want a future that's better than today's. And India has to create 1 million jobs a year if they're going to give employment to those young
China probably even more.
China even more. And so if we're not listening to those messages, the innovation environment story is just going to go on the sideline.
Yeah, Jim.
So, well, no, so I agree with both of them.
You can't do that.
You said
You're supposed to come with different opinions.
No, I want to pick up two different threads here, because one is, I think your point goes to what Chang-Hwa was saying before about inclusive sustainable development, right? I mean, because inclusive is not just about poor countries and rich countries, it's about divisions within countries. And we have to be much more serious than we have been about making sure this transition really works for everybody. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I actually found the Trump announcement about Paris in some ways interesting and in some ways reassuring, because you could see the response from states across the US, from states and cities, from companies.
Are you giving us the silver lining here?
Well, there is some silver in this cloud, right? I mean, which is, you could see the depth of commitment to Paris, right? Across many parts of the US, as well as, of course, across the rest of the world, China and Europe in particular. Yeah. And I think that's interesting. It was a bit of a galvanizing moment for many actors, even though it's obviously something that needs to also be.
It is also a soul-searching moment for all of us to think about what we need to do in order to move forward together. You know what, ladies and gentlemen, we have a huge topic today, which is innovation and the environment. Both of these topics are fascinating when they're put together, getting ever more interesting. But I think we really crack it, and we did it with wonderful stories and certainly a lot of strategic thinking. I want to thank the three of you for being with us on this. Before we go, final word from you. What does it take? The right kind of innovation for the better of the environment.
Well, so I think we need to find new ways of pulling together actors to drive the innovations we need.
Okay, Chang-Hwa?
Do it. Just really do it. I think this now is at the last mile space, actually. That's where probably the weakest link is at this moment. If everyone putting resources together and really do it, we're going to make it happen.
Isn't that a sneaker advertisement?
Really?
And David?
Well, we have to lead it with evidence, and our scientific communities need their voice in that. We don't want any of these fake news pieces coming through. We want to know what the facts are, we want to trust the facts, and we want to work on them.
David again, Chang-Hwa Wu, James Lip, what a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, you can visit our website. Just type World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and of course, Sina Weibo. From me, Zhongshi, and everyone here on the World Insight team, thank you for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world.